You know who Tiny Broderick was?
Broderick.
Tiny Broderick did the first free fall in history. She was a 15-year-old girl who traveled the fair circle with her father in the late 1800s and jumped out of his helium balloon from state fairs. And she was a little bitty thing because that's all you could jump with silk parachutes back in the late 1800s was a little bitty person. I don't know how much she weighed, but her name was Tiny. She's 15. And her static line broke one day. I don't know what fair they were at. They were at a state fair and it was showtime. It was time for Tiny to jump out of the balloon and her static line was broke. But part of it was the container was still closed. And she told her daddy she just sort of jumped out and pulled her hand. And that was the first free fall in history.
Huh.
Pretty cool, huh?
Now, earlier we got to talking about how it'd be cool to write a book. And, and the premise of the book was kind of, you know, how skydiving went from Tiny Broderick and what happened after World War II.
Well, that's when it, that's when it really started happening. All the military surplus gear got released to civilians, and they started jumping out of airplanes. And so the FAA had to quickly get together and come up with some rules about it, And in the 50s, they did the Baton Pass. They would pass a baton to prove that they touched in free fall, because nobody had ever touched each other before. So one guy would leave with the baton, and the other guy landed with the baton. They could prove they touched.
Wow.
And that was the 50s was the Baton Pass. The 50s was the Baton Pass. And then in the 1960s, they actually started to do rail work and get together. And so the wing wars were born at that point. In the early 70s, they had the wing wars. And they had the suits. Well, what would happen is they'd get together and they'd get a 2 or 3 or 4-way going and somebody'd go low. Yeah. So what do you do when you go low? You put on a bigger suit.
Right. Drag.
So everybody's getting bigger suits. So as the years progressed in the late 60s and early 70s, the suits got bigger and bigger. Then they had inflatable ones they called the balloon suits. And then they realized, why are we going low? It's because the base has suits that are out of control.
Right.
And they started trimming the suits. And in the 1980s, fastball was state of the art. We're not going low, they're floating out. And the suits started trimming down. And they went all the way to tight spandex. Fastball was state of the art. And that's when Tom Pyrus refined skydiving and actually wrote a dictionary that you can still get today of terms, levelity, proximity, and there's actually it's a glossary of skydiving terminology that he invented and wrote definitions for, and he took the relative work concept of diving down and getting in the base and realized that if we're going to build this thing, we've got to build it from the bottom up. We've got to put the base out in the middle. We've got to track. Half of them got to come up at it, and the other half of them dive at it.
Right.
We can't put the base out first and everybody dive at it, but we're never going to get 100 together.
Right. Everybody's diving.
And modern relative work was born by Tom Pyrus in Florida. There's
land.
And then there's the industry. The industry was born. It was never industry. It was always just a sport until people like Tony Uragallo and others came along and started making jumpsuits and canopies and containers and Mike Furry and the first Pegasus, and that's when the industry was born. And then in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, the industry people got together and formed PIA, which is Parachute Industry Association,
Right,
and started to standardize things, and where everybody's rigs were the same. When I learned to skydive, my main ripcord was right here, and my cutaway was right here. It was the cutaway and a reserve. It was called SOS back in those days, and I had to pull the cutaway, and if the little pud didn't come with it, I had to come back and get the pud. So my cutaway was on my left side. Then you borrow your buddy's rig, and he's got right side, left side. Oh. And it was catastrophe back in those days. And PIA helped standardize things. And then John LeBlanc and PD took it to a whole nother level. Yeah. John LeBlanc is We got 100. He needs a whole book on him.
Right? Exactly. That would be like a next. Exactly. But we're
John
just.
LeBlanc is the aerodynamic wizard behind Performance Designs,
Yeah.
and invented the Sabre, which I think is the best canopy
I've
they
seen
ever made.
I've seen multiple.
I realize the canopies that they've made since then are way outperforming it, but the jump from the old canopies to the ZP Sabre was the biggest leap they could have ever made. It was the most phenomenal. When they came up with that concept of the Sabre, it was just, I still jump on it today, man.
Nice. And what do you think?
There's just so much to talk about, man.
But wait, just to keep this on track for the.
Yeah, keep me on track, because I'll just jump around. I'll go from thing
No,
to thing
you're
to
doing
thing.
fine. You're keeping it fine. But there's a couple other points we'll touch on later as we run through the whole book. But we want to take our next step through Florida and get some footage of our friend who's driving a cab these days.
Jerry Bird.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Jerry Bird. Jerry Bird and the All-Stars. They built the first 20-way ever. First 20-way round. They built it in Oklahoma.
Round, huh?
Yep. And, you know, Jerry Bird was, he was the father of rolling work. Jerry Bird was the father of rolling work. Tom Pyrus is the father of modern rolling work, is how I would put it, you know.
Yeah.
Bird was the one that figured out we cannot continue to build rounds. How big can this round get? It has no integrity. This thing is all over the place. This side is floating and this side's sinking, and it's not really a round. It's a, man, the bigger it gets, we're going to have to build it from the center out and start putting people on leg grips and stuff and build a formation with integrity.
Structure, kind of
Something
like
that's solid, that we can, you know, if somebody bumps it a little harder than they should, it doesn't just take it out. It's a solid, it's a fast-moving base with integrity.
Right.
He was the first one that realized we cannot keep putting people into a round. How many people can we get in a big old round
Right.
and still be successful?
Right. I can imagine.
Jerry Bird was a big part of the first 100-way in Oklahoma, in Muskogee. I don't know how many attempts. There were a lot of attempts. They worked on it for a long time, and they built the first 100-way in the late 1980s in Oklahoma. Oklahoma has a lot of history in skydiving. And it's too bad that it's dying. And like a lot of places, you know, it's just economics. But Jerry Bird is really the guy we need to talk to. Jerry Bird can direct us to all the other industry people and all the other real game changer wizard people that were part of it, you know.
We talked about Bill Booth over there, didn't we? He brought a couple of things to the table.
Oh, Bill Booth invented the 3-ring. He invented more stuff than I had. I don't know that much about Bill Booth, other than he is probably the number1 industry leader that I can talk about. Ted Strong also. Ted Strong was a hell of a dude, man. He was a wizard, man. I don't know that much about Ted Strong. I got to sit in his office and talk with him. I convinced him to let me have the first Set 400. He let me leave Florida with a prototype Set 400. And I did the very first controlled study on the Set 400 before they ever manufactured it. And Ted didn't want to let me leave with the Canopy. He wanted to sell me the 425 or whatever. But, you know, PD had come out with Easy 384 at this point. And it was the first elliptical ZP Tandem canopy. And so Ted Strong had to quickly compete with Bill Booth and come up with something ZP for Tandem. And he came up with Set 400. And just so happened I was taking a Tandem course with Strong. And I had some money in my pocket and I wanted to buy a rig that week. And I did my Tandem course. We were jumping the prototype. He said, we've made 8. There's 8 of these. I was like, well, that's good for me. He said, no, you don't understand. 8 parachutes is not enough. There's no controlled study. You know, these are not in production yet. I said, man, I am your controlled study, Ted. And I ended up leaving Florida with one of the prototypes. And I went back to California and did the very first controlled study under the supervision of Dan Doherty, who's a whole nother chapter on Dan Doherty and Sugar Creek in California. But Dan Doherty monitored the wear and tear of the canopy and took care of the reserve pack jobs and actually redesigned the Broadhead attachment point, Vortex drum, to this day.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, that was I put about 400 or 500 jumps on it at Crazy Creek, California, in 1995. And ripped the Broadhead attachment point out. 400 jumps, it was gone. And Dan Doherty rebuilt it, and they redesigned it. That was exciting to take part in that.
The year after that's when I was in Crazy Creek with Jester, and I learned how to do the 360-degree hook turn on the same parachute I land on the beach today. Might be time to trade up.
Yeah, the mid-90s was skydiving was changing fast in the 90s. There were a lot. I mean, it was moving forward. Not just the industry, jumpsuits, gear, and skydiving itself. People started flipping over on their back, man, flying on their butt and standing up and skydiving. The 90s, I'd have to say, if there was any one decade, and maybe I'm wrong because I wasn't around in the 60s and 70s, but it seemed like the 90s, you know, from the 1990 to the year 2000 was just leaps and bounds in progression of skydiving gear.
Right.
It really accelerated, you know, in the 90s.
That's kind of when free flying and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
man.
started
I mean,
up.
coming into the 90s, everybody's on their belly, and the gear was still pretty floppy. And as the 90s left, the gear was tight and right. People were skydiving their ass off.
Right, and that's when...
The 90s was big for skydiving. You know, I don't really, know who we need to talk to about the 90s, but
Well, think about the 90s. Remember the wind tunnels? How all of a sudden wind tunnels were everywhere? Because when we sat down in the kitchen, we ought to talk about how to build the L1. Back then there was how many wind tunnels in the country? There was four.
Yeah, 3 or 4. That's right. And the L1, boy, the L1 was a long time coming. They finally built that L1 in North Carolina.
And what did that do to skydiving?
Well, it gave skydiving a training
The
tool.
wind tunnels in general.
It gave the free flyers an opportunity to spend a lot of time in the air and really progress. The wind tunnels have really changed skydiving, and it's actually leaving me. My knowledge of some of the free fall skills today, I don't, they're doing stuff today I never would have imagined. And I think wind tunnels had a lot to do with that.
Right.
Giving them the airtime they needed to refine what they already had going,
Yeah.
John Suter would be a good person to talk to on the evolution of wind tunnels and how it impacted free flying.
Oh, I remember Mama talking about John Suter a
The
bunch.
one of the first.
He could fly unconscious or something.
Well, he did fly unconscious. Stable,
Sit
just
fly?
passed out of hell, just sit fly, stable as can be, man. He fly t-shirt. He put his elbow in his t-shirt, get a little pocket going, hop up, fly right there, fly his t-shirt right there. I mean, he was. Yeah, John Suter, and there's another group of guys called the Flyboys out of Pyrus, California.
Really?
The Flyboys changed the game, man.
Yeah.
They gave free flying, they gave it energy and a new fresh approach. And I think the Flyboys out of Pyrus Valley, California, back in that was early mid 90s. They changed the game. They really changed the game. And I don't know if those guys are around anymore. Maybe some of them are, but I know they're not a team anymore. I know Eli was killed, but they really have a lot of respect for what they did for free flying. And I'm not a free flyer, man. I don't know that much about it, but I know they were a game changer, man. The Flyboys, and they definitely deserve a page or two in the book, man. Yeah, they would be those guys and the Flyboys would be excellent people to talk to about the evolution of free fly and European free fly. And the French. As much as the French piss me off with their bullshit attitudes and stuff, the French are the baddest ass fuckers in skydiving, have always been.
They've always
The
been
French
one of
have
the-
led base, base, wingsuit. The French, the reason they're egotistical is because they're badasses. The French are badass, man.
Officially.
And have and the book that I envision is really the evolution of skydiving in America, because that's what I know. But the different families,
Right.
the different operators. The European influence is certainly there. I don't know much about the European influence, but I know the French
What,
were badass, man.
what do you know about the Nelson family? I've always been curious. I mean,
I don't know that much. I worked for Roger during the 200 way attempts for a few weeks. He was good. He was a fun guy to work for. He had a lot of energy. You know, Roger's thing was Bill. We obeyed Bill because we were scared of him, and we needed his money. That's what we did with Bill said. Roger, you followed him like he was your hero, like you were following the Grateful Dead.
Wow.
Wherever Roger was going, where I'm going. The people that followed Roger loved Roger, and they just were Roger followers. I mean, almost cult-like. You know?
Yeah.
But I don't know that much about Scott of Chicago, Root Nelson, and the evolution of the Nelson family from here on out. I don't know much about it.
Oh, families, we haven't even touched on the Mullins.
No, the Mullins is the whole thing. But before we leave the Nelsons, Roger Nelson and his brother invented something called Freak Brothers in the 70s. And Roger was Freak Brother number 1. And the concept of the Freak Brothers, the way I understand it, because it was before my time, was the boogie concept. Roger invented the boogie concept.
Yeah.
He invented the student factory concept in a place called Skydive Sandwich. Skydive Sandwich was a big deal at Skydive Sandwich before Roger went away to prison. There was a lot of resources available and stuff.
Yeah, right.
And it helped, those kind of resources helped progress skydiving. That's just the way it is. Roger's brother was killed. I don't remember his name. He was killed early. I don't know, the 70s or 80s. But the Freak Brothers became, once Roger went away to prison, of course they took it over and called it World Freefall Convention. But Freak Brothers Boogie every year was in Freeport, Illinois. And the whole concept of the Freak Brothers was, let's leave the drop zone. Let's go to an airport that doesn't have a drop zone. Let's get all the drop zones to come, and we're going to blow that fucking place up. We're going to blow it up.
Hell yeah.
And leave with our just pile of garbage. We're going to blow it up and party like mad. And we're going to bring planes. We'll get all the drop zones to send an airplane. If everybody sends a plane, we can boogie and party like crazy. And then we'll all go back to our own drop zones and we'll leave our mayhem at some airport. And he invented the boogie concept. Let's go over there and party and blow it up.
That sounds so.
And it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it was called Freak Brothers. And they had the DC-3s. I mean, to get on a load at Freak Brothers in the early 80s, I mean, you were 3 hours away on Manifest. They'd call you on the loudspeaker. There was that many people there, and the planes were that slow.
Damn.
And it ended up becoming the World Freefall Convention.
Right.
But the Freak Brothers phenomena is worthy of a whole chapter, I would imagine. And of course, the people to talk to about Freak Brothers and the phenomena of Freak Brothers is Rook and Missy. Right. His children are going to be the ones that know the information on that chapter.
Right.
So that would be a great trip to interview them.
I want to go to Skydive Chicago.
So what we really need to do, if this book's going to go down, is break it down how it needs to be written. Because I'm not a writer, man.
Yeah.
But chronological, how it needs to be written, and all the different people that we need to talk to, and how you're going to coordinate all those interviews and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But the first thing to do is you go talk to Jerry Bird and Michael Mullins. And we will touch on Mullins before I close this session.
Yes, sir.
Michael Mullins flew helicopters in the Army.
Really? He was a chopper pilot.
And Mullins, he really was the first person to introduce turbines to the industry. He's an industry man. He was the one that showed everyone in the country the real way to go is fast. We need to go fast. We need to go up and down fast. We can get 3 times more skydivers in the air in one day were making 3 times more money. These airplanes are too slow. The skydiving industry resisted that. Turbines are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Mullins was the one that made people realize you're spending that anyway. Along the long run, you're operating inefficiently. All the money you're losing.
Right.
Go ahead and chunk down the money.
Lay down the big dirt.
And you're going to operate efficiently, and the whole industry followed, and turbines are it.
Right.
Reciprocating airplanes are dead in the industry. Turbines have taken it over. Mike Mullins showed up at Muskogee, which was before, it used to be the big boogie. It was the USPA boogie, Nationals boogie, and they had it in Muskogee, Oklahoma every year. Now, Nationals travels around. You can bid for Nationals. It's in Eloy, or it's at Pyrus, or it's in Florida, or Chicago.
Right.
But back in the day, they had it in Muskogee, Oklahoma every year. It was the USPA boogie and the national competition. Well, in the late 80s, Mike Mullins showed up at the Nationals. Of course, the big thing was the DC-3, man. DC-3 was it. 40 people on one load, buddy. DC-3 was it. They had a whole fleet of threes. Mike Mullins came in with a Helio Stallion that held 12 people, and he outflew those DC-3s, and he showed them, I can fly more slots an hour than you, even though I only hold 12. And he'd go to altitude and descend, load another load, go to altitude, descend. He'd do 3 or 4 loads before they dropped that 3.
What? Damn.
He broke his tail wheel that weekend, and his tail wheel broke. I don't know how many people were hating on him because he had the baddest plane there. He was out of the game. Just so happened, Helio Stallion, and there's only like 2 or 3 Helio Stallions in the world. I don't know if there's any left at all. Every now and then you'll see another Helio Stallion pops up, and it's been parted together from all salvaged Helio Stallion parts. And now there's another one. There's only a couple in the world, Just so happened, one of the last Helio Stallion skydiving hit airplanes went in the same weekend. And was a total disaster, but it went in on its nose, so the tail wheel was okay. It was taken off, overnighted to the Nationals. Mullins had it installed on his plane and went back to flying within 2 days of that airplane crashing. That tail wheel was on Mike Mullins' heels down, and he was back flying.
Damn.
I don't remember the name of the guy that was in that. I don't remember if he got out or he got trapped in that airplane, but I know the tail wheel was. Before the body was cold, they had the tail wheel off and sent the Mike.
Business is business.
Hey,
And
hey, when you die, we split your gear. That's just the way it goes.
did we talk about Bill Dause yet?
Oh, shit.
Wow. Holy shit. I don't even know where to start with this guy. Bill Dause had the first real boogie style drop zone on the West Coast called Puck Valley in the 1960s. And he had DC-3 and he did big waves, and a lot of the old footage that you'll see in some of the old skydiving movies of the 60s and stuff is all shot at Puck Valley and Bill Dause. And Bill Dause is, he really refined the mill concept of volume business. Volume business. This is not a sport to me. This is business. This is an industry. He was one of the guys that made it turn the corner of becoming an industry. Bill Dause, he is not scattered at all. He does pull-ups at 5:30 in the morning and eating an apple, and then he makes 20 skydives and gets up and does it again. And he's like 60. He was ancient when I was a kid, and he's still going. Does he skydive anymore? No.
Not often. He still gets to jump off once in a while.
Once in a while. Well, when I was in load, the biggest thing for Bill was just keeping skydiving. Keep him packed, keep him on every load, because we can't stand his ass down here. Keep him up there. And then every time we'd get out, of course we're in the parking lot goofing off, Bill would fly over under his black stiletto. Bill had black tennis shoes, black cutaway handle, black tennis shoe laces, a black P51 Mustang, black stripes on his DC3, black parachutes, black gloves, black socks. Black. Bill Dause was the only guy I ever seen that had a left-handed throw out on his BOC because his shoulder, his elbow was messed up. And then a couple years later, he'd be back to right-handed throw out. And then a few years later, he'd be back there on the left side again.
Damn.
Bill Dause was one of the guys that he resisted change until he realized he couldn't. And then he embraced it. You know, when I was there, you weren't allowed to do a hook turn. I mean, Steve Jester got fired for front rising. Now they got a pond or a ditch. Hook turns are full on. You know, Bill always resisted change, but he knew he couldn't resist it forever. Bill's about, I don't know, 4'10". This guy like this, hot-tempered, dressed in black,
Bang, bang.
and he's fucking serious, man. I mean, he's about the most serious guy I've ever seen. I mean, have you had many social conversations with him? I have. I've sat around and talked with him socially. Even socially, he is serious. He has no time for nonsense at all. But does nonsense constantly to Sky. Holy shit, Bill Dause. You know, I learned what to do, exactly how to do it. And I learned what not to do and never do that from Bill Dause. He will teach you exactly how to run a drop zone and exactly what not to do, all in one deal. If you ever have a chance to pull off the frontage road of Highway 99 in Lodi, California on a Saturday and just watch that zoo, it'll blow your mind. I don't know if it's as crazy as it used to be or even worse, but
According to
Epic. At this point, I'm going to turn the camera off because this is a spectacular short history of skydiving.
it's got a short history.
This is a half-hour history of skydiving.
All right, there you go.
And a pretty complete one at that. Thanks, Jack Reeves. Good work.
Well,